Today's episode had me sitting down with Michael Barron, who is my mentor and someone that I built a really strong relationship with, as I would honestly call him one of my best friends. We met in a mastermind a couple years ago and have since had calls for an hour every week, almost every single week. And it's a really different approach. I actually share with you and, with anyone listening, obviously, how we approach our relationship and what that mentor-mentee relationship looks like and what it's actually helped me unlock. And my goal really is always to share what's working for me. And I would say if there's one thing that's worked for me over the course of the last couple of years, it's been having someone as valuable as Michael in my corner. And so I hope you guys listen to this one with intent. If you're looking to find out how you can find a mentor or what that relationship looks like or what it does for you, then this is absolutely the episode for you. Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face-to-face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. All right, welcome to an episode of Successful Scales. And I've got to say, I don't think I've ever been more excited to have a guest on my show ever. And so, and I mean that with every sense of the word. And I'm just thrilled. We've been talking about this for the longest time. I can say I've never put more planning or thought and consideration into it. So if you're tuning in now, I can already guarantee it's going to be one of the better episodes, if not the best one yet. So lot to take in there, guys. But before we jump into it, like always, Michael, welcome to the show. And I would love if you could walk us through who you are, a little bit about your history, and of course, we will dive into everything that we've spoken about.
Well, Yoni, thanks. And I'm excited too. I think that this is it's going to be something different for the audience who listens to this on a regular basis. A little bit different flavor. They'll get a window into what you and I do every week, and we'll get into that. But by way of background, I've spent the last 30 years of my career in finance, and I like to nowadays think of myself as a bridge, and that bridge is between the present and the future. And in the corporate sense, that could be the company, the bridge to the future that any company envisions themselves down the road. My path to get there was a little bit unique in the sense that I spent the first 2/3 of my career in asset management, managing money for sovereign wealth funds, institutions, ultra high net worth individuals, and family offices. We built several investment advisory companies and started from the ground up. And when I mean the ground up, we're talking, $30-40 million, scaling them to $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, and then, as people like to say, exiting or transacting out of those. And they taught me a lot. That was a really interesting time in my career. About 20 years in, I I had this epiphany in that digging under the hood and trying to understand what was going on, both from a macroeconomic perspective and then from an individual sector or security level, was interesting and it was challenging. But at that point, I think I thought that I needed something new, and what I came to after going through a big self discovery process, after spending time with Dan Sullivan in his strategic coach class for 6 years, I really realized that my unique ability was based on being able to take a large amount of information, sort through it, prioritize it, communicate that, and then turn that into an actionable strategy. And that was really about growth, and that's what excited me most. So I've spent the last decade in more of an investment banking and consulting, personal consulting role with companies and private families, and that could be helping them move businesses from one generation to the next. That could be moving groundbreaking technologies, and you and I've talked about some of those into reality. And now, in as we sit here today, I, uh, I took a pivot last year, and you and I've talked a long time about this. There was a really interesting technology that came across my desk last year. They asked me to consult. The board engaged me to help them sort of come up with a strategy to help globalize this technology, and I gladly did that. And now they've asked me to sit in an operating role. So right now I am the chief operating officer of a British med tech firm called NeedleSmart. We have a revolutionary end-to-end digital vaccination solution, and we can talk more or less about that. But what's groundbreaking about this, and what I love, and what most certainly attracted me, as you know through our conversations, what attracted me to this was the fact that they took something as basic as the vaccination process, which had been unexamined, as we know, for the last 100 years. And we know that because here in the United States, where I am, and where many of your listeners will be listening from, we are still carrying around paper cards to show that we've been vaccinated against COVID-19, which is no different, than what happened after the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. So our technology is both hardware and software based. The hardware piece takes a sharp hypodermic needle. It heats it up to 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit and destroys it inside of 5 seconds, taking it from a piece of medical waste to recyclable waste, killing all the pathogens, killing all the bacteria, and rendering it effectively recyclable. The second piece of our technology, and this is what really energized me and brought me into the conversation from an operating perspective, was that needle destruction, Yoni, can then take that event, that injection, whatever it was, and push it into your medical record seamlessly. It can push it into a digital vaccine passport for your phone. It can inform the supply chain all along the way that the hospital or the health system or the clinic is using, where they are in that. It could inform public health policy globally from both, a country, a local, a state, and a municipal level. Who's getting vaccinated, where, when. So this selection, this technology is really groundbreaking, and it's what drew me from more of a strategic consulting role about how to make this happen into an operating role, meaning now let's do it.
Michael, it's so cool for me to hear you sort of speak about your background. And while I know it, and we've spoken literally almost every week for the last 12 to 18 months, with minor interruptions throughout our journey together. I just feel so lucky and fortunate to have you as a mentor and to be able to spend, such an incredibly, extensive amount of time with you. And, I connected with, I would say our now mutual friend, even though my relationship is far more shallow than yours, with Ron. And he was talking a lot about the concept of, and I forget who the original author was, but how your tribe is 5 people that you can really connect with. And then you go out to your next 15 ring, and then, all the way as you make it out to 150. But he was saying, listen, on the back of the level of interactions and where you sit, you and Michael would very comfortably fit within that, that first 5 people inside of that circle, and at the very most in that next ring out. So I just very publicly want to say, mate, I appreciate so much the value that you bring to my life, and I know that this conversation is going to be a little different because it's about being a little raw and vulnerable with the listeners in understanding what it's not necessarily what makes me and you tick, but it's what is this relationship to each one of us and how it adds such a wealth of value. I'll speak for you as well. I'd say to both of our lives, we've developed a pretty solid friendship on the back of this. So, mate, thank you for sharing. Thank you also for listening to you talk about NeedleSmart. I guess like you get so close to it because we talk about it every single week, but sort of hearing it at the high level and taking a step back, it really just gives me an insight and understanding as to why you are so passionate about it and why you've made the decision to, get off the bench or get off the advisory seat and really dig your heels in and get involved, because it is something, as you know as well as I do, that will ultimately change the world and the way in which we interact with our medical records, the way in which we can protect the lives of, those on the front line. And, I'm not going to sit here and give a whole pitch for NeedleSmart, but if anyone wants to, I'd be happy to do it on the back of this, and we'll put some links in the show notes. But Michael, thank you so much again for taking the time and for that background.
Buddy, the pleasure's mine. And, maybe it'd be helpful for those listening to have a little bit of understanding about what we do every week and why this is sort of, an inside look at something that you and I have come to equally value, both in time and in content and in relationship. I will echo what you just said, is that you are part of my inner circle. I think that our friendship is one of the most important to me. And we rely on each other for a lot of different things. And that's not simply business, that it has bridged into all aspects of our lives. And so I think that those listening today are sort of getting a fly on the wall or purview of what you and I do every week. And then as an add along, why it's valuable to us and why we're advocating that people who are listening to this podcast openly consider finding, a mentor, and we'll call this two-way street, right? I don't define me as your mentor and you as my mentee. This is a two-way street. It's a dialogue. We are sounding boards for each other. We know how to listen. I know now, because I know you well enough to know what you're saying and then what you're not saying, why you're saying it. And that can only come through time. And so you and I both in our schedules have made, that our window each week as near sacrosanct as possible, because it's important. So maybe it would be important to dig into sort of not necessarily all the details around how, but the genesis of what we do and why we think it's important.
I think that's a great starting point, and I'd actually take it one step further and say I think that genesis and that story arc. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there thinking, how do I find myself, on the back of this conversation when they understand what we do every week and how we approach it? How do we even get here in the first place? And I'll jump into it, and you can fill in the gaps here. But essentially, both of us were invited into a group that was a mastermind. I think is the classical term that people use, where our good mutual friend Gordy Buffton, Gordy, if you're listening to this, mate, we love you and thank you for empowering us or enabling us to have this really deep-seated connection. Without you, we wouldn't have met in the first place and be in this position. So, we both thank you for that. But ultimately, we jumped in on one of Gordy's masterminds. And on the back of it, I guess me being the very curious person, I like to reach out and just get an understanding for who people are. I mean, I'd say if you want to understand a little bit about me and you haven't interacted with me on a personal level, I will search for, I'm in a perpetual quench, an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and information, understanding, and how and why and who people are and what makes them tick and where they go. And Michael and I had a conversation, and to be honest, Michael, I can't remember exactly sort of how it transpired. I think we just sort of hit it off, and I don't know if it straight away went to happening every 2 weeks, or we sort of had one conversation that led to another conversation. Do you remember?
I think it was. I think it was that you and I realized that we had a lot of overlapping intellectual curiosities. I think that we were, I could identify with where you were in your business scale, and we left that hour both wanting, to continue that conversation, and it went. And originally it was every 2 weeks, and then quickly it found its way to being something that we now do every week. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd even say in some instances, like when we have specific deliverables, or if I have a critical conversation or something going in my life, that might even go up to a couple hours a week or 2 or 3 hours for the week. So definitely. And I'd say, in terms of all of my meetings and, even next week, I'll be out on holiday. I'll probably still get on this call. That's the reality. That's what it means to me to even share, not just from a professional lens, and this is what I'm up to. It's, this is where I am, and this is what I'm up to personally. And I think that's also an important takeaway too, again, as we get into this, is that there is no real distinction between personal and professional life, as much as we look to put them in a box and this is my personal life, this is my professional life. At the end of the day, we're all human. And at the end of the day, business is definitely a large component, and hopefully for anyone listening, a fulfilling component of your life. It is for me, and I test it's for you too, Michael. But it's undeniable that the two bleed into each other, and so making a distinction or a decision to spend an hour a week or more with someone that I really care about and I know really cares about me is just it's more than work. It's more than it makes all of this meaningful. And so I guess maybe on that, Michael, you want to talk a little bit about, what the structure looks like, or how we sort of open it all up.
Yeah. So I think that leading into that, when I think about sort of the evolution of our weekly conversations, I think that I wish that I had had this opportunity when I was younger. And and maybe it helps to sort of tell to tell a story that sort of maybe gives you an understanding of why. When I was young, my father was diagnosed with cancer when he was 31 years old. At that point, I may have been, I don't know, 3, something like that. And he was given 6 months to live. The doctors told him, look, you have advanced lung and brain cancer. We're not really sure what we can do for this. You get your affairs in order. My father didn't buy into that medically and said that, he wasn't ready to go, and that it was, that it was his will that he live longer. So, that's effectively what he did. There's no medical reason why that happened. Growing up, we tried to do as many normal things as you could. We were a part of something called the Indian Guides, which is it's a Boy Scout derivative here in the U.S., or at least was. And in doing so, each family, each father and son, had to choose a tribe name. So most of these were some derivative of the father was Big Hawk, the children the son was Little Hawk, and you can go down the list and figure out how that might work. Well, my father, because he had gone through chemo and radiation therapy, had lost all of his hair. He was completely bald. So my father thought that it would be fitting that he be called Bald Eagle, which was both fitting and funny. Me jumping on that saw my opportunity to dive in the door. Well, if he was going to be Bald Eagle, I was going to be Big Eagle, right? And I was the only child who was big something or other, and it sort of gives you a window of the fact that at that age, maybe I needed a little bit more structure, right? Maybe I needed a little bit more, a little bit more guidance. My father was a loving man, and we were navigating a tough period of our time. But I think that I tell that story, it was nothing malicious about it. It was just sort of a window into where I was as a 6, 7, 8-year-old boy. I think that one of the things that you and I connected with right away is that everyone has to be coachable. And this is something that is most certainly a soapbox or a stump speech for me. It is the message that I deliver every day, all day, to both my kids, to colleagues, to partners. You have to be coachable, right? And that works both ways. You don't get to a point where you stop being coachable or need coaching. And I think that people who are listening to this podcast are trying to figure out a lot of things right now, right? They are trying to grow a business in a highly competitive space. Maybe this is the first business that they've tried to take from A to Z. There are a lot of pitfalls as an entrepreneur. There's a lot of steep learning. There's a lot of change going on within this space as we speak. So there are tools, and your firm is the preeminent firm in being able to help people understand systems, processes, and methods to get them from A to Z. One of the things that you and I've repeatedly talked about and talk about every week is that alongside of that, though, there has to be that human element, right? There has to be that awareness, that connection, that thoughtful interaction about how this is going to happen. And that is really the genesis of the weekly call that you and I have, which is it's about being honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest with yourself, none of the other things that you're going to do are going to be rooted firmly in reality. It is about being vulnerable. And when you talked about how you and I met, what was striking was you had a group of men, 22 guys from around the world, right? Ages, maybe early 20s to 60s, maybe.
Yep.
But one of the things that we all identified was that the fact of creating a space where you could actually be authentic and vulnerable and say, I don't know, or I need help. I don't have this figured out. I'm struggling. Or recognize that, in someone else, that was a skill that needed to be learned, and it needed to be nurtured, because society doesn't teach that for men. I think the women generally, and I know that I'm generalizing here, I think women generally do a better job, and I think society's message is coming around to this. But if you're our age, that wasn't the message that you received growing up. So I think that you and I started at the doorsteps here, realizing that, okay, if we're going to unlock the value of our relationship, if we're going to unlock the value of this weekly call, we have to lay it all on the table. And that's really where we started. I knew where you were, in different phases of your life, because I had been there. And part of me said, okay, if I were Yoni right now, these are the things that I need to hear, and these are the kind of this is the kind of support that I wish that I had at that time. And I'm just going to be honest with you. And me sort of sharing those things with you at the beginning unlocked something for me, right? Which was, okay, well, if I'm giving him, if I'm laying this forward for him, I've got to be willing to do this myself. And I think that part of this discovery process, and I know this sounds, perhaps a little new age for this audience, in what they're used to getting from a content perspective, but stick with us. I think that the more you do this, the more comfortable you get. And so we've come to an evolution, closing in, well past 18 months now, of the fact that you and I are go-to contacts for when something is either, absolutely hitting on all cylinders in our lives and our businesses, or the converse, when things are, falling apart, or we've hit a road bump, or there's problems. You and I reach out to each other in near real time. And I think that it's having that holistic, that holistic perspective in what's going on that allows us to be so effective in the counsel, in the feedback, in the support that we're giving. And I think that this is a unique perspective for business owners. Because if you're at the top of the pyramid, right, and you are driving everything that's happening underneath you, from an employee, from a growth, from a strategy, from a marketing, from a customer service, from a supplier. Well, if you're driving all that, who's sitting in that role on the other side for you? Who are you asking these questions for? And the answer is you don't have all this figured out. Nobody expects you to have it figured out. But quite frankly, if you're listening to this, I bet you think you do. Right? I bet you think you have to be that fortress of solitude. I bet you think you have to have a lot of this figured out. And I will tell you that from experience, that one of the most empowering things is to have that support system, to have that outlet, to be able to be exactly who you think you are at any one time, to help you find that path. The difference is that with publicly traded corporations, you're going to have a board of advisors, a board of directors, an advisory board made up of investors or people who have varying skill sets that will be resources that'll be built-in sounding boards or mechanisms for feedback. But if you're a private company, there's no dictate or there's no law that says you have to have that, right? There's no rule that says you have to have that. I think that one of the best things that you can do is start to find that group, that advisory board, and it doesn't need to be big, but you should start with one.
Yeah, I think Michael, you hit on so many layered topics that I think that anyone at any stage of their journey really needs to take into account, right? So, first thing, you talk about the fact that you have to get to that level of comfort and vulnerability in order to actually be exposed. And I think for anyone who's running a company, founding a company, sitting in, the CEO seat and things like that, there are things that I'm not going to sit here and share publicly to my company that might stress them out. I'll give you things that are not the case, but like, let's say I wasn't able to almost make payroll and I had to take a loan on, I'm not going to sit there and tell my team members, like, listen, guys, like, maybe the money's not going to come in this week, but it's all good. We're going in the right direction. That's not a conversation that you're ever going to want to have, right? So the reality is having someone both, I'd say, external and having someone that is inside of that, circle of trust where you've really built that level of trust and integrity and you understand that you can go there. I mean, it's been, a paradigm shift for me in my ability to work through problems to a degree that otherwise I wouldn't have had the skill sets. I didn't have the experience. And so I definitely have gravitated toward this relationship, especially once we identified that, we really had an affinity for one another. There was, I'd say pretty quickly a level of trust built. And so I'd say, like, if you're going through this journey and you're looking for the right people to surround yourself with, I'd say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So don't just dive into the first person that, I've had lots of people that I've approached, spoken to, and just didn't feel that level of connection and never took it any further. So I'd say, like, getting that right is key. But to your point about having inbuilt fail safes, if you will, inside of publicly traded companies, most people aren't really thinking about this. It's like, I want to make all the decisions, or if I bring someone else in, what that means. And I think you have to have a level or a degree of humility as well if you want to achieve anything of any real size and significance. And I can tell you, my ambitions and my drive and where I want to take this over the course of the next 10 years, I would say is probably, as ambitious as anyone that you'll find. And I am acutely aware that in order to achieve even a remote portion of that success, I have to bring the right people in. And so, again, coming back to it all, this relationship is, I would say, one of the cornerstones of my ability to both verbalize things to someone who is, 15 years or so my senior, who's done some tremendous things across the span of a 30+ year career that, quite frankly, most people, you'd be in a very small percentile of people on planet Earth that have achieved the heights. You're talking about building multi-billion-dollar companies in terms of asset management. I mean, it's maybe not lonely at the top, but there's not a whole lot of people that are doing that. So again, coming back to the start, like, it's just a real privilege to be able to sit down and to have, you know, little old me sit down and just talk about, you know, the shit that I'm dealing with each week and the, you know, the ongoing layers and layers of complexity that are inherent with any scaling business. So I know I went through on a bit of a rant there, mate, and I'm sure there's a few things that you picked out on the back of it.
So I want to make sure that people realize, and because I think that one of the things that may go through people's heads, right, is that they may see these conversations as being, as being all give and no take, or all take and no give. I will disavow you of that thought immediately, because what I get from these conversations is of equal and greater value than the things you just described. So you were able to come to me with a different perspective, and I think that has tremendous value. I think that the fact that we can be authentic and completely transparent with each other, as you laid out before, has equal value. The fact that you are one of the most authentic, genuine, sincere people that I have ever met is most certainly makes doing this for me a lot easier, and straightforward. So I think that what people will realize is that once you start doing it, the benefits are both completely virtuous and they're circular. Um, I want to make sure that people who are listening right now are maybe have a path to this. And so I think that one of the things that if I think back, when you're managing a business that's doing 100 million, you have a different set of problems than you did, when you were managing, when you were at $50 million, and you have a different set of problems than you will have when you're at 250, 500, 750, and a billion. And that complexity forces you, as you grow and scale, to become really narrow with your unique ability and your skill set. And this is something else that you and I talk about near every week, which is that if it doesn't fall within your unique ability, right, within the things that only you should do, right, and Dan Sullivan, this is I want to make sure that people are keyed in on that term. Unique ability is a concept that was coined by Dan Sullivan at the Strategic Coach, and basically it is the synthesis of who you are across all aspects of your life, meaning your personal life, your professional life, your philanthropic life. It is something that you do naturally, you could do all day, it energizes you, and you would do for free. Okay? And when you synthesize that personally about what is your unique ability, as you're scaling a business, when you tie the two together, when you understand what it is and where you're going, your job as a leader, your job as CEO is to spend as much time as you can and to work as quickly as you can to get within that unique ability. And from a time perspective, the rest of it should either be outsourced, purchased, scaled, or gotten rid of, right? Divest yourself of that. So we spent a lot of time on this issue. You and I spent a lot of time talking about working within your unique ability and then being honest about those things. And I think that part of this journey, for those who are listening and those who are like you and I, intellectually curious and want to sort of understand or know what we don't know, what we're saying is this, is that the combination of understanding where you're truly going to add value and then creating the time and the space to sort of think intelligently about that without distractions, and to give yourself space to better understand what that looks like. I think that one of the traps these days is because we are so wired and connected and there's so much content being thrown at us in every platform around the clock, it is hard. I'll give you another example. One of my favorite clients in life was a really unique individual. When I met him, he was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. Grew up in the UK, was poor, his family, his family was of very modest means. Joined the military right after high school. Was stationed in the desert as a dental assistant. So in the British Army, you got up in the morning and you did whatever you needed to do, and it got so hot during the day that they took effectively a break or a siesta before they could work again when the sun went down in the evening. Now, many people use that, to nap or to do work out or do whatever. This guy didn't. He started with the Greek classics and read forward. He self-educated himself. Got discharged from the army, joined a dental supply company, worked his way up from basically sales to becoming a C-level executive, and then spent 20 years on the board. And I enjoyed spending more time with this guy's name is Les Jones than any other person that I interacted with from a one-on-one client perspective. Les and I would have the most interesting conversations. He knew something about everything. And he said to me at a time where my kids were, in grade school, and I was, juggling schedules and my career and trying to get kids to and from and balancing all this. And he looked at me and he said something and I'll never forget this question. He said, "Michael, you have a lot going on." He said, "How do you find time to think about things that are truly important?" And that question hit me like a ton of bricks because it was a polite way of saying, you got a lot going on. Are you really thinking about the things that are important? But it was also a challenge. And I've never forgot that question and the importance of keeping space for it. And I think that what this forum does for you and I, right, is it makes space for the things that are important. And I want to, people should be clear that this is not, people, listening to this might say, well, I have friends that can do this, right? I have friends that I talk to about this, or I have this group of people who are in a similar position to me, colleagues. And I want to challenge you a little bit on that I don't think it's the same. I think that the quality of this comes from a quantity of it. This isn't something where you and I meet for a beer once a week, talk about, sports, family, the dog, a little bit about business, where we're going on vacation, and then see each other, a month or two from now. This is something that we've deliberately structured to be that space where we can talk about things that are important, right? Sure, we know what's going on in each other's life. Sure, we know, where our travel schedules are going to lead both of us in the next couple of months. But that's because we spend so much time. And so I think that one of the things that I would, again, urge people who are digging in, if you're listening, if you've gotten this far in this episode, it's something that's obviously, there's been some sort of ping, something's resonated with you that you were intrigued with this topic. I would urge you to roll around in your head and let this idea sort of, build and grow. What do you need, right? What do I need as an entrepreneur? What do I need about somebody if I'm someone who is scaling a business, right? If I'm somebody who has grand visions and big dreams, what do I need to get there? Who do I need to support me? Who do I need to hear from? And I think that too often we don't start there. We don't start by asking, well, what don't I know, right? And what support will I need? And so if you start there, I think that the results and the answers that you're going to get are going to be different in a good way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to circle all the way back to one of your earlier points when you were talking about the fact that, what you needed a company that's at 25 million, that's at 50 million, that's 500, that's $1 billion. You're going to have, perpetual, more complex problems, but different problems. And I think that if you can even imagine what it is, I'm certainly not a $50 million company today. I can tell you that straight up. But what I do understand is that for me to get to something like that number, which, I'll say is also a vanity metric in many ways, don't just think about your revenue. I think that is, that can lead you down the wrong rabbit trail and something you need to be cognizant of. But I'd say that through this relationship, and I'd say I'm probably someone that probably didn't start with a massive ego has made me understand that there is so much that I don't know, and that through this and through having that level of vulnerability and through simply having a sounding board where I can talk about it, it has unlocked a whole different layer of potential in my ability to understand that, you know, you just don't know what you don't know. And even just having the sounding board, and both of us were talking about it yesterday, about Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights. And you sent me the quotes that you liked, and I'd taken some of the same notes. I actually haven't even shared that with you, but I'm looking down at what I wrote. The section where Matthew McConaughey, for anyone who doesn't know, Green Lights is literally memoirs of Matthew McConaughey's life told from a perspective of his life narrative, where it's about learning valuable lessons on how to live, you know, an authentically you life where you get the most out of it, and you're just a good human, to be honest with you. He just seems like one of the great people. And the quote or the line came from when Matthew McConaughey went and visited a monk, and for about, I don't know, 5 hours, he just sat there, you know, expressing and sharing and giving out all of this information about his life, to the point where he breaks down in tears. And I can't remember the response that the monk had, but essentially what it was, that's right. And that was all that he said. And so what Matthew took from that was that sometimes all that you really need is to feel heard, to know that you're not the only one, and that someone else has gone through this. And that was all that he needed to hear. And so I would say, again, you know, when you're looking to build and when you're looking to get to these levels that Michael talks about, the first step is removing that ego and really understanding that, you know, while it might feel lonely and there's the stresses of the world on your shoulders at times, someone else has been through it. Someone else is going through it right now as we speak. And so seeking out, a relationship like this has been fundamental in building a stronger base that enables you to, you know, it's not about pushing harder. And, you know, I would definitely say one of the topics that comes up a lot, and one of the things that's like a pet peeve of mine, is that whole hustle culture. And we talk about the fact that, you know, that's not an answer, but what it does is it allows you to get clarity on what is important, or at least it allows me to understand what is important and how should I be investing my attention and time and energy and focus.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that I think that we've done an additional disservice by glamorizing hustle culture. And I want to be clear. This is not. I'm not saying don't work hard, but I think that the concept of balance is foundationally important. I think that if you buy into this, you know, at its core, you're going to find yourself in a position down the road that you're not necessarily comfortable with, because it's not long-term sustainable. And I think it winds up saying, well, deal with this now, and then you can just deal with all the rest of it later. And that is not how life works. You know, when you talk about sort of proper metrics, and you mentioned the fact, well, you're not, Yoni said that I'm not a $50 million company. Let me tell you something. Where you are now relative to where you were 18 months ago or 2 years ago is night and day. And that's really all that matters. And I say that from both, most certainly, first and foremost, a personal perspective, right? And everything that's going on within your, you know, within your suite of businesses. And I think that the quicker that people can help define where they are in life, right? Be authentic and be clear about who they are, where they are, and where they really want to go. Where you really want to go doesn't have anything to do with tied to a hard metric, right? If you arrive at a $50 million company, and you know, from a revenue perspective or an income perspective, and nothing else in your life is working, well, shit, that's not success. And so I think that getting clear on that really quickly is foundationally important. It is the most important thing.
I'll add to that point. I'll add to that point. To cut not Yeah, so not to cut you off, but also, I mean, you really highlighted something paramount here. You know, like people will work, and I've been guilty of it myself historically, of working more hours than I care to admit. But ultimately, when you're working that many hours and your life is your business, and you take a step back and you really think deeply, like, what is this all for? Did I really start a business to work 100 hours a week, not to be with, my situation now, my fiance and my child and my dog? Am I really doing myself a service trying to get to $1 billion valuation if along the journey I'm not enjoying it, or I'm not actually experiencing all the things and seeing my son grow up and spending time with Tully and going through this entire journey? And so coming back to it, the revenue aside and wherever you're going, you need to get clarity on being true to yourself and what your actual burning desires are. And it looks like you had something to say, Michael.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that when you are scaling a company and you are early on in this journey and you don't have it figured out, I will tell you from repeated experience that you're going to look back and realize that these were some of the most exciting, enjoyable, collaborative times of your journey, and you should celebrate those. The quicker that you can get clarity on where your unique ability is and where you're going to truly add value, the more you're going to enjoy this. And you and I have talked about sort of this aspect over, this is another sort of repeating theme in our conversations. I knew that once I was working within that I had hired the right people, we had bought the right technology, we had outsourced the things that could be moved off of our plate, and I spent most of my time in one of a couple areas, and that was sitting down with the people who are leading different departments within our firm, and connecting with them on a regular basis. And this is something you and I repeatedly talk about, which is that I had breakfast or lunch scheduled when I was in town with somebody from my team or staff, or one of my clients every day. I was always home for dinner. I was up before my kids, I was already at work before my kids got up, but I was always home for dinner. But during those times, I spent time listening. And I think that the other thing that society has done makes challenging for people today is how do you have a substantive long form conversation? And this is an area of real concern to me. I look at the way that everything in life is now reduced to being right or wrong, black or white, good or bad, and it's really made to be an instant reaction, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, or some poll, yes, no, good, bad. I think that you really have to dig in, and so I would challenge you to consider how do you have a deep and meaningful conversation, not just the ones that we're having here, but rather than talking and waiting to talk, which seems to be a norm, right? I'm going to tell you a story, and you're waiting so you can tell me your story. I think that the point that I was making is that I spent a lot of time with my team because I wanted to know what was going on in their life. I mean, I could see what was going on in our business. And when you move that outside of the office or you move that offline, I think that people become comfortable. And when, just like you and I do, when you turn that into something that is routine, some of these business problems that may go unspoken, some of these interpersonal conflicts that may happen within an organization begin to reveal themselves. And you've had that happen repeatedly within your companies. You've had that happen repeatedly as a result of doing this over the last 18 months, right?
Absolutely. I'd say that, one of the greatest gifts that starting a podcast has given me is a very acute ability to actively listen to everything that is being shared with me, because it's a big shift. I definitely was guilty of waiting my turn to say whatever it was that I wanted to get out into the world. But what I've learned being the host of a show is that in order for this to be entertaining, engaging, and for people on the other end listening in to get value out of it, I really need to listen deeply and understand, well, what are you really saying? What's the message that's actually coming across, and how can I turn that into the next interesting question that's going to relate to the audience so that they can, again, get value out of it, but also that I can learn while I'm on this, while I'm sitting in this side of the chair. And so it's been, I'd say fundamentally transformational in my ability to start to move into what I believe is more, closely aligned to my unique ability. And so I actually would love to sit on that point for a second, because when you're looking at any business, typically ones that are bootstrapped or not heavily funded at the start, or don't have a clear roadmap or structure, it's a little bit more scrappy. And I'd say that's probably how more companies start than most, and obviously why more companies fail than survive over the test of a 5, 10, 15, 20 year period. And that is because at the start of it, you are a jack of all trades and a master of none. And you are typically put in a position where you have to be really good at being a generalist. And I think if you don't let go, and if your ego dictates that you need to make all the decisions, and that you have to have your arms around every single aspect of it. And this is, again, even before you're building real systems and processes, and those things aren't going to happen from day one, and nor should they really happen from day one while you're trying to figure it out. But I guess my point is that as you go through this journey of growing any business, you start to understand where you add value. And if you're lucky, start to remove yourself from areas where you don't, and you can acutely be aware of those instances. And so I think, like, for anyone who's growing a business, having that clarity in it's not your self-value, it's removing the ego and having clarity on, like, what do I love? What am I actually good at? And hopefully those two things are aligned. If they're not, I can't help you. But getting real clarity in where you add value. And so I'd say, I can't actually go through this whole podcast without saying, when I look at the sort of the things that have happened in my life and the growth of this business, I attribute so much of it to having not just an incredible relationship, obviously with you, Michael, in the last year and a half, but, I wouldn't be anywhere without having an incredibly strong co-founder in Lippy, and our ability to have complementary driving skill sets that enable us to both grow and build concurrently while, navigating the ship to stay in alignment as to what that vision looks like. I mean, if you're going through this journey and you don't have someone inside living and breathing and eating and sleeping everything that's going on, and it's just you, sure, that is going to feel lonely. And also, you're going to learn really valuable skills about, again, one of the most important relationships that you will build in your life, because you spend so much of your time in your business. So anyway, just sharing that point that these things are only possible, and you can only go through these journeys when you find the right people who have the specialized skill sets to take you to those next levels.
Yeah, let's dig in there, and I think that's a great building block. First of all, you and Lippy are a great team, right? You bring different skill sets. You both appreciate the differences and are able to work collaboratively. But to back up for a second, I think that it's important that people begin to define success not as, how much can I hold on to, right? Or I have to be the single point of traffic for all decisions. And that's a recipe for failure for sure. But it is more important that people start to realize that the more you can give away, the quicker you're going to scale. Your job as a leader of these organizations is to be clear on the vision, to get help and informed, to build a strategy. And then your job is to understand where your value is in that, and getting the right people on the bus. And when I talk about my interactions with my team, I always wanted to know not only what my team was doing, but this is something you and I have talked about in looking forward as your company grows. Who else do I need? And so I always used to have this sort of wish list, and the wish list was actually filled with people who I liked, people who I respected, people who I admired, and worked for one of my competitors. And I would sit down and have coffee or lunch with them, on a regular schedule, simply to understand what was going on, simply to build a deeper relationship. And if there was an opportunity that they were unhappy or we were growing, and maybe there was a way for us to sort of bridge that opportunity together. I think that as a leader, uh, the quicker you can get to my value is to understand our vision, is to protect our strategy, and then to find people underneath that who are better than me at driving those individual tactics. The quicker you can get there, the happier you are going to be, the more efficient your organization is going to be, the more energized you're going to be. You will see concurrent positive results, virtuous results from that, that are truly sustainable. And when you talk about building an organization that is built for the long term, I like to say I like to use the acronyms definable, repeatable, sustainable, right, or scalable, DRS. And it is only through giving away, being clear, giving away, and then empowering the right people on your team as you grow that you're going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And what's more is, I'll take a step back as well. Like, I've just been so blessed in my life, in my upbringing, and, so much of it is luck. But, I've had an incredible mentor from day one in my father, who is a pretty accomplished entrepreneur himself. He's had 4 or 5 exits in his career and has built companies from scratch and sold them and, done a whole lot of that stuff. But I can say, like, some of the earliest lessons and the quotes that I just heard on repeat, likes to repeat himself. I think as you become a father and get older, you just do that. And I'm already guilty of that. One of his mantras that I just always remember is the sum is greater than the parts. And so if you're not able to give up, whether it's equity in your company or building, another one of his quotes about, win-win, if you're not able to build those relationships, then ultimately you're doomed to stay at your, we talk a little bit about the Peter principle. You're promoted to that level of competence, or your ceiling of competence. Now, I would say that the same goes from the standpoint that if you have to hold on to everything, then, and whatever that looks like, responsibility and accountability or financials, etc., your ceiling is very, very low. And so I am, going on a little bit of a diatribe here, but I think to that point, it's just so important to take a really good hard look at yourself and where you want to be. Because if you're not clear on where you want to be and understand that the journey to get there means bringing in the best people, and you actually mentioned before, I'd say one of my favorite quotes, and I'd say one of the things that I'm particularly good at, one of the very few things I'm good at, and that's from Good to Great by Jim Collins, is getting the right people on the bus. Is probably the most important thing that anyone can do in any company. It doesn't matter where you're driving toward, getting the right people on the bus and getting them on board and driving toward that vision is key. And so in order to do that, you have to make it worth their while. And making it worth their while means giving something to get, hopefully something a whole lot more valuable out of it.
I agreed. I think that what we're talking about at a higher level there is creating that culture, right? Creating that corporate culture, and your job as leader is to be the protector of that. And the protector of that means that if you are scaling and your visions are large and your dreams are great, you can't keep all of it. You're going to have to give it away to be able to get there. And you're going to own a smaller piece of a pie that's infinitely larger. The other piece of that is that through, if you find yourself, and this is something that I've always talked about. The founder of Hilton Hotels, Barron Hilton, was asked by a reporter, look, you have guests who stay at your hotels, you have employees who work for you, and then you have corporate shareholders of your company. Who do you focus your time, and who do you think is the most important? He said, well, that's easy, right? It's my employees. My employees will take care of my guests. My guests will take care of my shareholders. Your job as a leader is to really understand what your team, what your company, what your organization needs, and how best to get it there. The things that you're doing today will not necessarily translate in the future. So you need time and space to think about that piece of it. Equally as getting the right people onto the bus is the opposite of that equation, when the bus needs to stop and get somebody off. When you realize that you have the wrong person on the bus, you have to ask yourself, as a company that is in a high growth mode, right? It's human nature to think, well, I can fix this, or this will get better if I just do this. And around the edges, maybe if it's small, but I will tell you, if this is something that is a deal breaker, it's going to remain a deal breaker. And the best thing that you can do is help that person find the next path that they're on, the next organization that they're going to blame, as quickly as possible, with as much respect and dignity as you can. And sometimes having tough discussions is tough. Yoni and I have spent hours over the last 18 months talking about individual sort of topics like this and the importance. And then, we all learn lessons in life at different paces. But if I were to try and drop a breadcrumb for those who are listening, it's that when something isn't working out in a small company, it's not just a small issue, right? It's going to be a major roadblock. It's going to take up hours of your bandwidth. It's going to be disruptive to your team. And if you're not deep into it, communicating regularly with your team, they may not tell you this, right? They may not tell you the actual damage. And Yoni's nodding now because he has, he like all of us have our own war stories about this issue. But you're not doing yourself, you're not doing your organization, and quite frankly, you're not doing that individual any favors by pretending that this isn't a real issue that's, that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, Michael, I could sit here and talk to you forever. Our hour every week always seems to be getting shorter and shorter. But I'd like us to end on this point and dive a little deeper before we wrap things up here. It's definitely something that comes up frequently. And before I share a little bit about one of the stories that Michael has helped me through, or a couple of them, I'll say that I'm currently listening to the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is all about his musings. He's an incredible angel investor. He actually is, I think, one of the founders of AngelList, or the founder of AngelList. I think he's invested in over 200 companies. And Gino Wickman of Traction, which, if you've listened to any one of my episodes, you've heard me talk about it. And, he brought up the same topic that you're bringing up. Both of them are brought up. Gino says, with anything that you're doing with a person, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a hell no. And Naval Ravikant said, if you're not sure if it's a yes or a no, it's a no. If you're not diving in head first and you don't feel 100% sound about it, then trust your gut and your instincts. And I'll say in the specific situation that, Michael saw me shaking my head about 4 months ago, a little bit over 4 months ago, we had someone who was the head of our product team. She was with us for 5 months. And I would tell you from day dot, I was unsure about her. I didn't feel like she was a right fit. As brilliant as she was and as intelligent as she wasn't right. She wasn't a right fit for the company. And it was the second mistake that I'd personally made in bringing on a person into that position. And, I'll continue to make mistakes. I'm far from perfect. I will never be perfect. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot firstly from her through that period. So while she was with us for 5 months, I learned a lot of things. Nothing was relevant to us getting any closer to developing the product that we wanted to develop. But it was a really tough situation. And I'd say for weeks, I went back and forth talking with Michael about the situation. And, our relationship is one where it's not like, Yoni, you have to go ahead and just do this. Off you go. It's, Michael's leaving me breadcrumbs. He's helping me expand on the thoughts and the insights that I am developing myself. And on the back of that and getting some anecdotal insights into things that he'll share will help sort of alleviate some of that concern or tension or insight, and ultimately leading me to making a good decision. And I'll say getting through that experience and now where we sit, I mean, we're going to have our alpha release inside of 2 months. The team is firing on all cylinders, and it is just a different look operation inside of our product team. And so, to echo your position here, it can absolutely suffocate a company. We lost team members inside of that function of the business as a result of poor management. And it was devastating because they were really high potential, low performers as a result of the environment they were put in. And so we have things like skip level meetings now. We have a whole people and culture function in the business. It was a big learning. So yeah, to your point, and you articulated it beautifully, you've got to make sure you're getting the wrong people off the bus and making space for the right people to get them on the bus so you can really understand where you're driving to. And having many smart people together is an absolute game changer. And that's really, when I look at my responsibility as the CEO right now, I have a few responsibilities. I didn't know that it was Barron Hilton that had that quote, because I always use it, not in that exact context, but it's exactly that. All I care about is my people. I'll look after them and they'll take care of the rest. And so I care deeply about my entire team. But what I'm always trying to do is bring in great minds into the business. And so I'd say those are really the two things. It really boils down to those two things. And if you can get them right, you'll be successful.
I agree. I think that, for those who are at the end of this podcast with us right now, to understand that they're already successful, right? They've already built something, and there is most certainly runway to go further. Where I would urge them to consider digging in is on that issue. As leader, you have a strategy, right? You have a vision and a strategy. Your job is to protect that, is to bring in that. But protecting that is to me is two things. One is it's creating time and space for yourself to understand these issues, right? And while there is a lot of learnings and there's a lot of resources available, one of the most important things that they can do is truly invest in themselves. That's both it starts with a time perspective, right? Invest the time and space to be able to figure some of this, to give yourself the freedom to figure some of this out, to align yourself with people who can help you on that journey. Once you do that, you are going to be set up to be able to play that same role with your team. You are going to be present. You'll be available, right? They will feel it. You'll be emitting this high vibrational energy that they will feel that you're locked in, you're engaged, right? You're both physically and emotionally available to dig into this. And once that happens, this is not an overnight thing, but as it starts to unfold, you'll feel it. You'll recognize the difference where you were 6 months prior, 12 months prior, 18 months prior. Not only will you recognize it, but other people will. Your teammates, your family members, your partners. You will start to get feedback, right? As you start to get alignment between these issues that will give you validation, that will give you feedback that you are on the right path. You'll feel that internally, you'll hear that externally, you'll see the results from a data perspective. They all come together that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can't top that, Michael. So what I'm going to say is thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing, your wisdom, not just with me for once, but, the broader group of listeners. I committed to it at the start, and I will say right now, this was definitely one of my best episodes. And if you're going to listen to any of them, I'd say this is the one to get deep insights into, what it's like and how I'm thinking and the people that I'm choosing to surround myself with to elevate my ability to go further. And so, Michael, I've thanked you a lot of times. I'll thank you one more time, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Brother, you are one of the most important people in my life now, and I'm glad that we found each other in a forum that works for us. Hopefully those who are listening, will be able to tap in and experience the same thing. I'm excited to see where we both go in the future, and know that we'll be there for each other along the journey. So I love you. I appreciate it.
I love you too, mate. And we have many years left together, so I'm looking forward to all of them.
Amen.